Dear Helpful Friend, this is the, I think, 12th episode in the wilderness series, and we're going to talk about another aspect of wilderness, namely how do you adapt towards wilderness. In the first shows we talked about wilderness ideas as depending on Dao, Wuji. From there we started describing the different levels of what is wilderness with the animals and the other species like ghosts, demons, gods, and so on. And we talked about immortality and how to get to this immortality, what kind of immortals there are, and so on and so on. And now in this episode, we are starting to talk more about how to adjust yourself in such a way that you become part of what we can call wilderness. Because it is not as easy as it seems. So let's get on with it. Hi dear Help Builder friend, you are going to be a great help if you like the content of my videos by making sure that you press the like and that you share it with your friends. If you have friends who would like to give a donation, or if you would like to donate yourself, of course you're more than welcome, because it helps us to get the videos going free and open for everybody to see. And for this we have to ask ourselves a few questions. One thing that has to be really very clear from the beginning, at the moment that you start studying Tai Chi Chuan, or when you are starting Chinese medicine, or when you're starting to study Daoist philosophy and theory, is that Daoism as a whole is a highly mystical form of religion. That is also why we can say it is a very elitist religion and way of life, and it is not as easy as people think. I remember when I was in Shan in, I think, 2009 or something, or a long time ago. There was a big ceremony with a lot of Daoists from all over China collected there, making a prediction, a sort of omen they wanted to have about the future of Daoism, because they wanted to rebuild Daoism in the model of Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism. They need to become like a folk religion so that normal people can become Daoist. There was an older prediction from a long time ago that said that in about this time Chinese Daoism would grow to become like a real world religion, and as a result of that become very big and very successful. And this might actually be true, but I was there with my sister and other people. And at the moment when the ceremony was being performed, the rituals being performed, there was like this huge flag, and the movement of the flag was seen as the oracle that said, like, you know, have a beneficial prediction or a not so beneficial prediction. But the thing is that in the process of popularization of Taoism, you see that a lot of things are getting lost. It is the same with many other things. The moment you popularize them, then the essence of it usually gets lost, because winning souls, so to say, can become more important than actually what it is about. The result that you have at a certain point a lot of members who have actually no clue what it actually all means, so they start making up their own things, and that is of course why the Wilderness series exists. So first thing to say then in that sense is that it is a mystical religion. It's a mystical way of life, and that means that your experience of life and reality and so on is very important. You see with a lot of people nowadays, they take all kind of drugs, psychedelic drugs and so on. They're looking for particular kind of mystical experiences, so they overdose on stuff from nature which your body also makes. And as a result of that, they have all kind of experiences, but these experiences, they're artificial. So even though in your mind you can keep them as a memory, they never really become part of your reality, because at the moment when you stop taking these stuffs, the effects of your spiritual development or your mystical experiences wanes off. And what Taoism actually wants is that you, through your purity and directness, have a direct mystical experience of life as it is, and as a result that actually are continuously living that kind of a dream. So that dream, of course, is a little bit like, no, it's actually the experience of wilderness, both within yourself as well as around you. Like for me, for instance, when I walk on the street, I don't walk on the street, I walk in a forest or on a field where people build all kind of stuff to try to push the wilderness aside, but then at the same time you see when the wilderness goes out like that, through the cracks of the city, the wilderness comes back up. And also in the behavior of people, you see that people try to manage things according to clock time and all kind of other things, but at the same time they start developing all kind of qualities which are definitely nature. That is why they fall in love, and that's why they become angry, and so on and so forth. All kind of things that have to do with that. And also the competitiveness between people in itself is all part of that same kind of experience. So what does that all mean? Daoism is a very practical religion, in the sense that you don't want to learn anything that is of no practical use. So even though there's a large theoretical framework that we worked on in the earlier movies, at the same time you can say Daoism is in essence something based on practice that you have to do so that you can experience the truth of it. That is why Daoism calls itself a scientific religion. In itself, it means that when you learn something like a theory in Daoism, it is scientifically proven through your practice. Like for instance, you can't practice Chinese medicine without practicing Chinese medicine. You can't prove Chinese medicine theory without learning the different kind of anatomies and the different kind of meditations and practices through which you actually can experience the body as such. That kind of training, the mystical experience of life, which is the foundation of the proofs for things like Chinese medicine, and that is called neidan, very often also called other names, but neidan is the most famous name for that. There are three major techniques that you use in the realization of neidan. One of them is called postural alignment, one is called breathing, and one is called management of your experiences. The postural experience is called titai, and titai actually means the body form. When we talk about postural management, we talk basically about managing your postural form, and it means that the way how you hold your composure, your body composure, is very important. Like for instance, slacking in your posture, that is the opposite of that. So the cultivation of your body form is more important than the cultivation of your body. Like a bodybuilder, they create a particular kind of body form which is based on the swelling and the rupturing and the damaging of your muscles. That is the opposite of what they actually mean with titai. Then breathing exercise, which is called husi. Husi actually means exhaling and inhaling. So that is basically what it is. Breathing is exhaling and inhaling. So it means the fact that you exhale and inhale, and how you exhale and inhale is very important. It's not just the fact that you exhale and inhale, but it is how you exhale and inhale, but it is also what you exhale and inhale. So these kind of things are very important. And what you inhale is of course very important in this modern time, because Chinese ancient culture and modern scientific culture, they do not agree about what you're actually inhaling. Same like in India, when you talk about prana, prana means light. So when you do pranayama, prana breathing, then at that moment you do light breathing. At the moment when you do breathing in the West, this is always oxygenation of your muscles and all the things that come with that. When you talk about Chinese breathing, you talk about breathing emptiness. This space around me is emptiness, and this emptiness, when you bring that in your body, has different consequences for your body. Light has different consequences, and gas has different consequences. And these different consequences are very important, because when you do an exercise that is meant to develop particular aspects of emptiness, and you do that in the form of gas breathing, you won't get these results. You get other kind of results, and then you get mistakes that people think that, you know, they do energy work and stuff like this because they feel all kind of processes in their body, but you know, it is all very abstract and you don't really know what it means. You don't really know what it is. So that accuracy of meaning and what is the consequence of that meaning, that is something that is pointed out by Lao Tzu, by Xuanwu, by Confucius, the earliest authors and the earliest thinkers of Chinese culture that are actually considering what is neidan about. And the last one is Yitu. and E2 is usually translatable best as attentive awareness. And at the moment when you talk about attentive awareness, the literal meaning of E2 is actually sense mapping, because according to Daoism, you have 6 different kind of senses. They produce particular kind of experiences, and these experiences they produce effects in your body, emotions, thoughts, and so on and so forth. And these are having particular kind of values. When we are talking about sense mapping, we are talking about the impressions created by the 6 forms of awareness by our sense organs. These are the senses of the eyes, the tongue, the nose, the ears, our heart. The 6th one is usually what we call the mind, and that is actually the sense of thought and awareness as a whole. And this is where we are talking about our mystical awareness. In modern text, that's very often translated as the mind itself, but the mind itself is not really aware. The only thing that is really aware is your heart and your sense organs. Each of themselves, they have an awareness, and this awareness creates ideas, and these ideas, they all come together in your heart. That's your final awareness. And at the moment when it comes into your heart, then it has to be, you know, processed into your reaction to the world, which in all circumstances should be right. But because we make mistakes, we also talk about the 3 different sins in that sense, where our self-perceptions, our sense perceptions, our sense mapping actually have to deal with, namely the sins of our body, the sins committed by our mouth, by the things that we speak out and that we actually say wrongly, where we say wrongly about ourselves or about other people or about the world as a whole. Then of course there's also the senses of our thoughts, the things that we think on the inside. The way how to resolve these sins and the mistakes of our perceptions is usually through 2 different kind of methods. One of them is called Jijing, and Jijing actually means silent and non-moving. So that means being silent and not moving. When we do link body practice, for instance, one of the videos in our series is about link body practice, and you can follow the link towards the Qigong app where you can learn about these kind of things. And at the moment when you are developing these kind of things, you develop stillness in your body posture and in your awareness, so that your sense organs do not try to penetrate what they're seeing with judgment. And as a result of that, you gradually clean your heart. And then the second branch of activity is called Yundong. Yundong is usually translated as sports, but the actual meaning of Yundong, transporting action, it means that you're doing something that actually moves something from A to B. Yundong is a sort of a new word. In the past we used to use usually more a word like Daoyin, which also means pushing something from one place to another place. So this is what exercise is for. At the moment when you are moving, like in Tai Chi Chuan, or you're moving in Qigong, Daoyin and Qigong, they are symmetrical, but Tai Chi Chuan are asymmetrical. And at the moment when you do this, every time when you make a move, you produce Jin, and Jin is basically the force in which you produce a movement into a purpose, a form even. And this is producing eventually, when you do right, produces a Qi. And Qi in that sense is not an energy, because that's the Jin already. It's a force, and you might call this the energy of a thing. But at the moment when you produce something, a form, and you create a particular kind of form, you become like an epitaph of that what you're trying to express at that moment. Like the paintings behind me, they express being turtles, and you can really feel at the moment when you watch them, one of my best paintings, that they are swimming, floating, whatever they are doing at that moment. In one of the earlier videos in this sequence, we did heart practice, and I started that time to help you go forward in your neidan practice. And at the moment when we are going to continue with that, you need a little bit more explanation, but now you have a little bit of a background in the mysticism to get you into the experience of nature as a whole, so that you have this wilderness experience and can start experiencing things for what they really are. The thing is, at the moment when you are meditation, what you want to experience at a certain point is that through your own stillness, your whole body becomes like a sense organ. All your senses actually merge together and they become like one. And at that moment, you start noticing that you are part of the larger scheme of things. At the moment when you do link body practice, you create a particular kind of mystical experience of oneness with things in general, through which communication with things, that sounds very, very weird when I repeat that all the time, becomes easier, and that is a prime technique that you need for making, for instance, diagnosis. And also is very useful when you apply this to eating counseling, or when you apply this to thinking about the progression of your family life or your career, your working career. All these kind of things, they are very helpful if you have a little bit of community skills with the larger plan behind things, so that you do not make the wrong decisions that actually go eventually against nature. As the I Ching says, when you go against Tao, the Tao of nature, then at that moment you will very quickly regret that, because things will start turning against you. That means that success basically means that nature doesn't turn against you. At the moment when you do not have success in life, nature turns against you. And that means you become sick, you become old, you die, your hair falls out, something like this. All the kind of things that we usually see as negatives. At the moment when we are involved in the whole mystical experience of life, then at that moment we start noticing that because we ourselves as a mirror become empty, we start noticing that the things that take place around us actually take place through us. This is where the saying comes from in neidan practice, as outside you as it is within inside you. So that means that, for instance, the climatic factors from the environment, they can be felt inside you. The things that you can find in food, you can also find inside yourself. This is why it is very important to, for instance, do food testing, so that you can understand the subtleties of food inside you, and as a result of that you can nourish yourself by managing these kind of processes inside yourself, so that you need much less food and that you are more quickly satisfied, because sometimes you only need the stimulus of a bit of food to get a process going, and as a result of that getting better with your self-sensation. So for now, let's try to see how that works, because if we go meditate and we start with feeling the rhythm of our heart, and then we feel the rhythm of the space around our heart, and then the rhythm of our outer surface, our body form, and we feel that the rhythm of our heart is the pumping of our heart, the rhythm around that is the protective layer and the buffer that actually protects our heart against negative influences on the physiological level, and then our skin itself, when it is on the outside of our body and we feel it pumping, we can say, okay, in about 1 hour you have so many kind of pulsations, and that should actually be really good. When the Xuanwu says when you do pulse diagnosis, you have to feel so many pulses, that is based on that natural rhythm, where we relate the wilderness speed with the actual speed of the body and what it should be inside. So you have to do some calculations on the basis of your feeling experiences. It is not like what, for instance, my teachers at the Chinese medicine school used to say, the amount of the breathing should have so many beats or something like this. This is not the case, because the breathing of most people is not a natural breathing, and as a result of that you can't use the breathing as a result. It's the same like you have to take the hands and the size of the thumb for the sizes of the body. That is also not exactly right. You have to be able to perceive the body as such, so that you can see which structures belong to which structures, so that you can see, for instance, where the channels are running, where the acupuncture points are running, and that you don't have to rely on the mechanisms of measuring, although the mechanisms of measuring in some cases can help, but it should not be your prime method. In the same way, your pulse diagnosis is not a diagnosis of some mechanical patterns that you can put inside a computer system, but it is a poetic representation in your awareness of what is happening inside somebody's body. And that is an artistic quality. You have to have an artistic quality to make a pulse diagnosis. And that artistic quality comes from your mystical experience of life as a whole. And that mystical experience of life as a whole is represented in the quality of your diagnosis and your therapy, but also in the quality of your exercises. At the moment when you have done these kind of things, your heart, your mind, actually they are the same for Chinese medicine. They are at that moment, they are calm and they are open. And by pointing your attention to the Dantian and being aware of your outer form at the same time, feeling this breathing of the pores, opening and closing of the pores of your body, through which you can feel your connection with the space around you. And at that moment you start noticing that the pressure from your head becomes less, and as a result that you gradually create openness so that your senses actually become decompressed, and as a result of this decompression you start noticing way more than you normally would do, because what our mind does is based on our habits. It actually starts pre-selecting our senses. They pre-select what they want to see, what they do not want to see, and all the things that you habitually do, they give you preferences. We complain about the algorithm of Google or Facebook, but our mind actually does all the time the same. And then we have a lot of Facebooks. We have our eyes Facebook, we have our tongue Facebook, we have our nose Facebook, we have our ears Facebook, we have our heart Facebook, and so on and so on. So we have a lot of algorithms inside ourselves which are pre-selecting what we want to see, what we don't want to see, and as a result that we're blind for things. But at the moment when you meditate then, and you develop that kind of meditative lifestyle, you start seeing things for what they really are, and as a result of that you postpone your judgment more willingly, and you can start seeing what is the value of things. And you see that things very often they're not as bad as they look. Things are very often not as good as they seem. That is part of the mystical experience of things. Things, you know, become more relativistic in relationship to each other and so on. It becomes more difficult to say this is right, this is wrong. You certainly wouldn't radicalize yourself in any kind of direction, because at the moment when you look at life as it is, you see all kind of experiences coming to you which might, at the moment when you make a final decision of it, actually block pathways for progress in a particular kind of direction or particular other kind of direction. Daoism usually is very ambiguous in its choices. Daoists are anyway, because when you make clear choices about all kind of things, you are bound by them, because morally when you make a decision you have to live by it, you have to take the consequences. Like now at this moment, in this time of epidemic disasters, when you decide not to take a vaccine, that is your right, but at the same time, because a vaccination doesn't prevent that you get the epidemic factors inside yourself, just makes that you do not, or you are much less likely to get sick or to even get hospitalized. It doesn't completely avoid it, but it is much less. But you are at the same time a spreader, and because everybody is in open contact with each other, all the vaccinated people, certainly in a country where for instance 80% of the people is vaccinated, the 20% left are highly susceptible to get a vaccine, because you know they have no protection, and they are now going to be confronted with the vaccine, with the virus from all kind of directions. And it's not something that you normally hear in the news, because otherwise you get this blame game, like who is to blame for this? And that is the difficult thing. You have rights and you have moral obligations, and even though you have rights, your moral obligations and your rights are not always balanced with each other, and as a result of that, when you take your rights, you might run a particular kind of risk. If you take your moral obligations, then at that moment you might avoid maybe disease, but at the same time you may contribute to the suffering of the people who take their rights. It is all very complicated. And that's what Daoism says. It says you have to be very skeptic about things, and you have to postpone your judgment as long as possible, because everybody might be wrong. So I hope you liked this video. If you really liked it, make sure you click the like button and you share the video with people that you think that might be interested in this. Daoland is a non-profit organization, and as a result of the fact that it's a non-profit organization, we try to become well known as a resource. Without funding, we don't get any subsidizements. We live by donations, as a good monk does. So we're not planning to become rich, and the people who are studying with us to become a therapist or to become an instructor in the Qigong practices, or in Qigong practices, or in fitness practices even, or dietary practices, or I Ching practices, any kind of things, they are paying for their own studies on cost basis, and as a result of that, any kind of funding is good to help us go forward. We have a weekly program, so in exchange for your donation, you are free to participate in that program. If you want to try a trial class, just let me know.